Right, let's get to Goodnight Sweetheart, which I want to talk to. I could talk to you about all day. But I think I'm really fascinated by time travel anyway. I think it's a really interesting topic, and I think it is something that's really difficult to get. Well, it's impossible to get right because it's an imaginary thing. It's an imaginary
Who's to say?
Because I think, like, with Goodnight Sweetheart, and it's a comedy show, so this is absolutely fine. Sometimes you thought about what the knock-on repercussions of something would be, and sometimes there were no knock-on repercussions of a thing. Whatever worked for the script, I think, is fair enough. You weren't too concerned about the physics of it all.
Well, we don't know what the physics are.
We don't, that's part of the reason.
And when we started, we agreed we weren't going to get into any pseudoscience.
Yes. I think that's a good call.
Although later on, we had a little bit of fun.
Yeah.
And we had other writers, some very good writers, and they brought their own ideas. We knew that time ran parallel, so there was no going and coming back a year later, and it was the same day.
Yeah.
So you could have an episode in which Gary is forced to have dinner twice in two different eras.
Yes.
And other than that, we did sometimes try, for example, Gary did try to warn Churchill about Pearl Harbor. It didn't really work. Yes. But generally speaking, he kept his nose clean as much as he could in the past.
Yes. He did. There was something he did. It's a while since I've watched the whole thing. He did something for his son that changed the future for his son completely.
Yes.
So, like, he was capable of changing the future a little bit.
Well, that was a very nice episode because it was Ian Lavender who played his son. And the thing was, we didn't write that one. And one of the things I'm proudest of is how many writers we've worked with, and how quite often I can't always remember who wrote what. Other people, thinking they're being very flattering, say, I can always recognise yours, but I don't want them to recognise mine. That's not the point.
No.
And the idea was that, Gary, he's not a very nice person, really. No. And so when his son comes into the shop, who's obviously down and out, trying to sell a dress that Gary had given to Phoebe 70 years ago.
Yes, yeah.
Gary feels really guilty that he hasn't provided for her, and makes some arrangement in the past that there will be some money for them.
Yeah.
And then next time his son comes in, he's very prosperous, and that was rather a sweet episode. So that was Gary sort of doing the right thing.
In amongst a lot of terribly wrong things, though.
Yes, and of course, and then when we decided we would finish it, because we'd always said this should run 6 seasons, like the war did.
Yes.
And of course, I'm talking 30 plus years ago, when we're still relatively young and full of that stupid belief that you'll never get kicked out of paradise. Whereas what we should have said was, can we keep this going for another 40 years?
Yes.
And so what was going to happen? And we decided that Gary was sent back for a purpose. In the last episode, he saves the life of Clement Attlee.
Yes.
And having done that, the trap shuts. I mean, that's a bit C.S. Lewis and probably pushing our luck, but it was but there was a very nice conceit in that, which was that Gary was stuck in the past, and he knew that Ron might still be in the West End flat that he'd bought. So he was, I don't know if you remember it, he was writing messages on the wall, knowing that Ron was actually stripping the wallpaper. And as he was stripping the message, and that was rather cute. I like that. There are some things, because I know, like 95% of geeky boys, I read a lot of science fiction in my teens. And so I, the same way as there's hardly anything on Star Trek or Star Wars that I haven't read in a Galanx yellow dust-covered book, I could draw on all that SF stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I think Goodnight, you could reboot Goodnight Sweetheart as a Life on Mars style drama.
Yes.
It would still be funny, I think.
Yes.
but equally, I think it could be. You could do a very gritty version of it because it's which I honestly think it's a beautifully written thing, and you made all the right choices because it's a primetime show. You don't want to be going into the paradoxes of time travel too much, and you don't want to be. Yeah. I think the decision you made about you've got to get Gary in this position where you feel a bit sorry for him, and he's a bit of an idiot. But you don't hate him for being a bigamist, which is what he is. So he's a horrible man, but you managed to make him somehow sympathetic, which I think. But you could do something. It's really interesting the idea of if a person realised they could have an affair and definitely would never get discovered, though they do obviously meet at some point actually when the thing goes wrong.
Yes.
But then, how would that affect you psychologically in the cheating?
Yes.
And there's a. I mean, you do go into this, so I'm not. But you could do something quite dark about that because
he did have a nervous breakdown at one time. But I think the thing was that when we wrote it, we agreed that the only person who could play it was Nick Lyndhurst because we couldn't think of anyone else who would retain sympathy.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I sort of again when I first I thought, is Nicholas Lyndhurst is he believable as this guy that women would be falling over? And it absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. Well, I saw you being interviewed with Lawrence about Goodnight Sweetheart online. It's quite a long interview. And he mentions the idea of setting a version of it in the 60s, and you go, no reprises. And I guess this was about 15, 20 years ago. Maybe more than that because you did then decide to reprise.
Yes. Well, what happened with the reprise in 2016 was that the BBC decided they were going to do a season of classic tributes.
Yes.
And the producer of the guy from the production company, John Rolfe, who we'd worked with a lot on Birds, he said, I think we could do Goodnight Sweetheart. And in my no reprise mood, I said, but without the war, what's the jeopardy? And John, because he's a very smart bloke, said, it's the Beatles. And we realised that because, as I said, time marches in parallel.
Yes.
By chance, 2016, which is now 21 years since Gary was stuck in the past, is the year that Love Me Do comes out. And Reg Stedman says, you used to play that in the pub, Gary. Love me do. No, Gary said, no. Yeah, you did. And so because we were thinking of a series, the idea that Gary has got to somehow extricate himself, from this web of lies that he spun a lifetime ago, that was going to be our jeopardy.
Yeah.
And once we knew we had that was one thing. And the other thing we decided was, we had many things, but the other key thing was when he gets back, he finds he's got a daughter. And so now he's got a real pull as well as a push, plus the fact that whereas Goodnight Sweetheart originally was a show about a man from the present in the past, now it's a show about a man from the past in the present because even we're talking nearly 10 years ago when we did the special, but even between Gary was last in the present in 99 and 17 years later he'd never seen an iPhone or a selfie stick or a phone box that was now a defibrillator or a silent car. And so we had great fun with that. And when we had the original cast, and it was by far the best viewed and most and best reviewed of those specials, and everyone assumed, we'd do a series with the original cast. But apparently, and I've never had this, because the BBC don't tell you anything, that at that year's Edinburgh TV Festival, the comedy collective had railed against the BBC for spending money on old shows rather than new shows. So instead of doing 2 or 3 series out of this, they only did 1. And I'm pretty sure that they were committed to Dick and Ian's show, committed to Porridge before Dick and Ian agreed. Dick and Ian are much smarter than us. And they probably said, we'll do Porridge, but we want a series contract first.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask them. I'm going to be on a platform with them next month. So that's where we left it, and it was very frustrating.
Yeah.
Because we knew what we could do with it, and then a few years later, something called COVID happened, and to pass the time, I started trying to novelize the series. That didn't happen.
Yes.
And I did about 15, 20,000 words. So thinking about, it's 62, it's Cuba, it's the Beatles, it's Dr. No. And of course, Gary is friends with Noel Coward.
Yes.
Noel Coward is big friends with Ian Fleming. They were neighbours in Jamaica. Right. Ian Fleming wanted Noel Coward to play Dr. No.
Right.
So what's more natural than Noel Coward throws a rap party, invites Gary and Phoebe along, and Phoebe starts telling Ian Fleming that her husband used to be a spy in the war. But as Ian Fleming ran spies in the war, this is news to him. So suddenly, once you start thinking,
yeah, it's great.
But then COVID stopped, touch wood, and I just put it in a drawer. And then out of the blue, last year, we were approached by someone, a publisher, who said, "Do you want to do a crowdfunded book that will?" He was a big fan of the show.
Yeah.
And he set up a company. He said because mainstream publishers aren't really interested in TV-based shows, but there are people out there who love them. Would you like to do a show based on Goodnight Sweetheart? And we said, well, not a show, a novel. And we said, well, yes, if you think there's an interest, and the way to find out if there's an interest, as you know, I don't know if you've done anything crowdfunding. I've not done any crowdfunding. It's partly because, contrary to opinion, writers have to eat, yes. But also because it gives an indication that there is, an interest in it.
Yeah, that's what I love about it. I think the democracy of it, and more so than if you can get something made and it doesn't need to be loads of people. So,
no. And a lot of people, I'm told, want the package where their name is a character.
Well, I've put in £100.
Okay.
So I want my name in. I don't mind if you make me a very unpleasant
first
character.
and second name.
Yeah, I want my full name in there. You can make me me and slag me off. You can just have Gary saying Richard Herring's he's a prick.
No, because it's 62. There's a little kid called Richard Herring who keeps nicking the hubcaps.
But anyway, there must be some in the future. He's going to come forward, isn't he? But anyway, so look,
that's true. Actually, he could come to a gig.
He could come and see me in a gig. So it's worth backing just to see my name ending up in Goodnight Sweetheart, which I think would, square a circle.